Welcome everyone. My name is Carla Maria Pérez, and I'm the founder and lead coordinator of the Healing Clinic Collective, and a great fan of Ancestral Apothecary School. And Healing Clinic Collective and Ancestral Apothecary formed this collaboration about a year ago called CHIRP, Community Care Herbal Response Project. And it was an effort that came together at a time where both, the pandemic and the uprisings were coinciding, and levels of stress and need were increasing rapidly all around us for many reasons. And we felt it was an important role that we could play to initiate this response project so that we can offer what we have access to, both materially and informationally, knowledge-wise, to folks that need it the most, right? And the Healing Clinic Collective is based here in the East Bay, and we are a grassroots organizing project for healing justice. We were founded in 2013. And our goal is really to support the movement in integrating healing as part of our change work on a local level, to create a model for people to follow for how to build out health and wellness infrastructure for and by the people in a particular community in a way that is right for them. And we collaborate with Ancestral Apothecary School, which is a really important institution in our community as well. One of the first schools in this country, if not the first, that is focused on folk and indigenous plant medicine from communities globally, and have a really robust staff of mostly people of color and many queer herbalists, which is just something rare to find here. So I'm happy to be here representing both of these organizations this evening. And really happy to present Rebekah and Tracey to you all. Rebekah Olstad and Tracey Brieger. I'm happy to say that they're both herbalists in the Healing Clinic Collective's network of practitioners, and they're also both teachers at Ancestral Apothecary School. They're both phenomenal herbalists, and I'm gonna let you go ahead and look at their websites for more personal information about them. But I just want to thank them both right now and let you all know in advance that you're in for some really great information, contextualized in both sort of, a sacred and caring way and a political way, and of course, within a health framework. So thank you, Rebekah and Tracey, for being here with us tonight. This is our agenda for the evening, right? So we're going to hear from Rebekah in a moment, and she's going to share with us a little more about the Run for Salmon. I'm wearing my t-shirt this evening. So there may be a range of information that people have about the Run for Salmon. So Rebekah's going to get us all on the same page in that way. And then also share some context about wildfires and what's going on. People might know California has a wildfire ecology. Fire is part of the local ecosystem here, and that was a rhythm that was well known and well tended to by the First Nations of this place, in particular the Ohlone, the Pomo, and other tribes in this area were well known for traditional controlled burns. So I'm super excited that that's going to get shared with us this evening too, and we'll talk about some ways to prevent harm from smoke and wildfire smoke. Share some important information on where to source herbs, some recommendations for if we want to stay values aligned when we, exercise economic activities around our health. Then there's places we can support with our dollars to purchase herbs that will help us stay in alignment with our values. And then we'll move squarely into, we'll take a break actually at that point, a quick break, and then we'll move right into talking about the plants themselves, and then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So I just want to review some online tech tips. I can't see the chat or anything right now, but we invite you as you have seen already, to use the chat, to be active, to respond with, you know, hey, yas, and yeah, that's great, and all your exclamations, as well as questions and comments or connections you might want to make. We're very interested in also hearing from anyone on the call about information you already have. We know this is not a one-way conversation. People come with life experience, previous trainings, grandma's recipes, and all of that, you know, so please feel free to share those in the chat as well. As you've noticed, we started recording this so that we can share it with folks that signed up but weren't able to come. And so if you don't want to be recorded, you obviously have the option to turn your camera off. And if you don't want your name exposed, you can also change your screen name so that it doesn't show up when your camera is on. But let us know in the chat if you have any special requests around that. Am I missing? I can't see my notes. Hold on 1 second. I'm trying to see if I'm missing anything on the Zoom tech. I don't think so.
Just
Yeah.
closed captioning that we
have. Thank you. Just that. Thank you, Becca. Yeah, so thank you, Phoebe, for being here with us. We have a closed captioner. It's always been important, but it has never been exercised enough to provide you know, features for access to our community. So we hope that it's helpful, that there will be live closed captioning taking place during the whole meeting. And if you don't already know how to access it, you should see a CC button at the bottom of your Zoom window where all your other control buttons are. You just click that button and it'll say, it'll tell you, you know, subtitles, allow for subtitles or for closed captioning. And then there's, I think, a very clear selection, and the closed captioning will begin to appear on your screen. So that's, I think that's it for right now. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Becca.
Great. Thank you so much, Carla. Actually, I think I'd like to start with a brief grounding. So I'll invite folks to, you might keep your video on or off, to find a comfortable position. And you might close or lower your eyes. And I invite you to observe your breath as it is. Just taking a few breaths at your own pace. And I invite you to think of a quality you might want to call in for yourself for this next bit of time together. Perhaps it's openness or curiosity, patience, something that's true for you. And I invite you to breathe that quality in. And I also want to take this time to say some gratitude. As Carla introduced us to, we really want to hold this work with a lot of specialness and sacredness. And talking about community care, healthcare, the plants is such a special time together. I'm calling in from Oakland, California, Huichin, Ohlone territory. And I want to say a special thanks and gratitude for being on this land, and really encourage folks to, if you're not already, learn about the Sogorea Te Land Trust, to pay the Shumi land tax, to help support Ohlone people, to protect the West Berkeley Shell Mound site. And I know we have folks calling in from everywhere. So I invite you, if you're not Indigenous to the land you're currently on, to send a gratitude and to stand in solidarity with those peoples. And to the folks calling in today who are Indigenous, I'm also praying for your visions and for your efforts to be uplifted, to be successful, for the barriers to come down. And just giving a lot of thanks to the plants, to our ancestors. And if there's anything else that you want to call in for yourself today to support you, to guide you, I invite you to take the time to do that as well. And when you're ready, you might wiggle your toes, wiggle your fingers, and open or raise your eyes. So hi, everybody. I'm Becca. It's so nice to be here with you all. Thank you so much, Carla, for setting the tone for us and introducing us, and for being a part of such beautiful projects. It's such a pleasure to work with you and Tracey and so many other dear people. And thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm just so honored and so happy that we're here together this afternoon to talk about this topic and also to support the Run for Salmon. So I want to talk a little bit about the Run for Salmon. I know some of you, because I see some Run for Salmon folks on the call, have participated or may know about the Run for Salmon. And for others, this may be new. So the Run for Salmon is a prayerful journey led by Chief Colleen Sisk of the Winnemem-Wintu tribe. That's the territory that some people know as the Shasta area in Northern California. And the goal of Run for Salmon is to restore the salmon runs, protect the waters, and protect Indigenous lifeways. I've had the amazing opportunity to participate over the years, and it has just changed my life to follow the leadership of somebody like Chief Colleen, who really knows and understands the land and the waters in this deep, deep way, and knows what to do to really restore that balance that has become so out of balance. It's just a gift to follow her leadership. So the Run for Salmon is in its 6th year. The first 4 years, we followed the route of the salmon from the ocean and through the Bay, Ohlone territories, here, San Francisco Bay Area, all the way up north, all the way to Mount Shasta. And the participants of the journey, they do things like walk, bike, run, boat, horseback ride, all the way up to Shasta, following this journey. So we get to know the land really well, and the waters really well. And there's a lot of joy and there's a lot of sadness in really witnessing how those waters are very degraded. There's a reason that the salmon can't make that journey. This year, the salmon are coming down. So we're following the path of the salmon from Mount Shasta out to the ocean. It is a private run this year because of COVID. So it is private. In the years past, it's been public. So if that's something that calls to your heart, you know, keep your ears out for perhaps in the future an opportunity to participate in person. And there's also a lot of ways to support this beautiful run from wherever you are. So definitely by being here together, we've raised amazing donations. So we raised through ticket sales $1,128, which I'm super excited about because it's a very grassroots effort. Run for Salmon, you know, can absolutely use that money and put it to really good use. And if you feel inspired to give more, absolutely, please, that would be so wonderful. If you go to runforsalmon.org, there's a donate button, and you know, right at the top, and you can donate directly via PayPal as well. Another way that you can follow and share the journey of Run for Salmon is by learning and sharing the curriculum. So we have this beautiful curriculum created by a 4th grade teacher and a librarian to really teach the story of the salmon, teach issues around water, climate change, Indigenous sovereignty, learn about salmon. And it's for children, this curriculum, but it is absolutely for all ages. Like, I learn a lot from it every time that I read through the curriculum. So I encourage you to, you know, you can learn from the curriculum if you have young ones in your life. If you're an educator, this is a great resource to share. If you know educators, it's a great resource to share. And we're also having a Run for Salmon Teach Week that is coming up June 26th to July 3rd. And you don't need to register. We're really just sharing snippets from the lessons on social media, and we're asking people to help us amplify and share about the lessons and just engage with us in that way. So if you follow any of the Run for Salmon accounts, which I can put in the chat later, you know, it's just Run for Salmon on Facebook, Run for Salmon on Instagram, Run for Salmon on YouTube, and help us amplify. That would be amazing. And then one other idea I had for ways people can be involved is food donations. So again, there's a small private run happening this year, and we're still looking for some food donations. So if you have a connection at a coconut oil company or know a bakery or things like that that can make food donations, you're welcome to email me, and I can put folks in touch with the head cook. So those are just a few ways to engage. The other thing I think I'll say, if for folks who maybe if you're not following, I do want to say with some sadness that this is a really dire year for the salmon. The particular salmon that Chief Kaleen Sisk is calling back are essentially almost already extinct, and there's this really clear plan of how to bring them back. There's other salmon in California, and those salmon are so endangered right now, and it is because of drought. It's really, really dire. And if you follow, you know, there's another amazing coalition, Save California Salmon. If you follow their work, you'll really learn about there's some salmon that just, it could be like 0 eggs hatching this year in the Klamath in certain areas just because of the temperature levels of the water. And that's catastrophic. You know, so I hold that with a lot of sadness and tenderness. And it's also really a call to action for all of us, because that's, you know, to me at least, that's not the world I want to accept. I have to do everything I can to think about how we can change that, so that that's not the future that we face. So it's a really important time. It's a really important time to stand in solidarity with Indigenous peoples who, you know, salmon they're so closely related. Chief Kaleen Sisk says that what happens to the salmon happens to us, and she's speaking about her tribe. And I think we can also, you know, read the picture that all of us are going to suffer if our waters are not healthy. So there's a lot more to be said, but I do wanted to share, you know, just really the importance of Run for Salmon. A huge, huge thank you to all of you for our collective fundraising effort, and really encourage you all, if you know, feel that spark and passion, to plug in how you can, help share the curriculum, and really help us, you know, share this message of protecting the salmon. And to me, that leads into our topic today. There was a reason we wanted to actually pair these two topics, is because when I think of wildfires and increasing wildfires, just like Carla said, like, to me, the increase of wildfires is so directly tied to climate change and to colonization. You know, so this graph that we're looking at here really speaks to that. Temperatures are rising, snow is melting sooner, forests are drier longer, and all of these are contributing to the really intense, extreme wildfire seasons that we've been finding ourselves in these past few years. And, you know, I'm here in California, and it's not just California, it's many parts of the West, and many parts of the world are experiencing things like this. To me, it's really important that we ground this conversation in the why, right? Like, we want to take care of ourselves, and we want to take care of our ecosystem. And we can tell that our ecosystem is really telling us a lot right now about what's not working. And that, to me, is another reason for myself, as a Chinese and European descendant person, I really want to follow Indigenous leadership, because they know how to take care of the land. And I also wanted to, you know, just include this beautiful picture, again, to really honor Indigenous land management that has always happened and is still happening. And colonization and genocide of the settlers and European peoples have tried to take that away, and yet Indigenous people are still coming forward to manage the land in a good way. Though there's a lot of barriers. So I consider, you know, part of my work and part of a collective work that we try to get rid of those barriers, so that Indigenous people can just do what they know how to do. So with that, I will pass it off, you know, as we start to talk about wildfire smoke and how to take care of our health, to a conversation about what happens when we breathe in wildfire smoke. I'll pass that to you, Tracey.
Hey, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Tracey Brieger. I live here in the Bay on unceded Ohlone land also. And just huge thank you to you all for joining us this evening. Huge forever thank yous to Carla and Becca, as wonderful people to work with on this project. And especially to Becca for her leadership in making sure that this fundraising happens for Run for Salmon, because she's been an engine behind this workshop tonight. So thank you, Becca, for all your time and energy and love and dedication. Right, so we're going to start off this phase of talking about a little bit about the health impacts of wildfire smoke, right? So you can see here, like, how does this actually, you know, how does this affect us? And Becca, I think, laid out beautifully the how does this affect us on a system-wide level and sort of a spiritual level, on an existential level, and then bringing it to, like, actually, you know, our physical bodies here. So in terms of looking at the health impacts of wildfire smoke, so most of the damage from wildfire smoke actually comes because of the really, really small particles in ash and smoke. And so people call this, if you want to get a little bit geeky, a PM 2.5. And that means particulate matter 2.5. And you don't have to know what that means, but just to give you a sense of scale, you can see over here on the right of the slide, the size comparison. So for example, a human hair is about, 50 to 70 microns. And now we're talking about something that's 2.5 microns wide. So if you took one of your hairs and imagine something 20 times more narrow than that, that's the kind of size of the particulates that we're talking about in smoke. And so it used to be a very Western thing. It used to be that people thought, oh, well, the bigger particulates that are in air, those are the things that must hurt us more, right? And must hurt our bodies more. But what's actually true is that these tiny, 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 tiny ones, right? These particulates that are 1/20th of the width of our hair can actually get farther and deeper into our bodies. And that's part of why they have such strong health impacts. So they can get further and deeper into our lungs. They can cross over into our blood and actually get into our hearts and our brains. So that's actually one of the reasons that they can be so dangerous, is just how thoroughly they can get into our bodies. And so this next part of, what does that actually feel like for us? And y'all probably, if you've been around any kind of smoke, but including wildfire smoke, have perhaps seen or know people who've experienced some of these things, right? It can cause short-term health effects. Like, smoke really dries us out. So eye, nose, throat, lung irritation, sinus irritation, headaches, coughing. That's sort of what's happening just when our bodies are starting to get dried out. Coughing, sneezing, and of course, these particulates are getting into our lungs. So it can, welcome to our four-legged friends. So the particulates can get into our lungs and also cause shortness of breath, which when we're having, challenges with breathing and not getting as much oxygen as our bodies need, that can also make us feel really tired. So just to keep in mind, be on the lookout for those things during wildfire season. Am I noticing I'm a little more tired than usual? Am I noticing, that I'm having a little bit more shortness of breath? Because those might be signs that your body wants a little bit more support. Over the longer term, there are longer term health effects, including, bronchitis, asthma, and it can get to be pretty serious, like cardiovascular issues, like heart attacks and stroke, that kind of thing, right? So you can see in the diagram too, like asthma attacks, chest pain, that is, those things can happen also. And so overall, this picture of just compromising our respiratory system, and it reduces immunity to be breathing wildfire smoke. Also want to note that there are certain people who are at greater risk from wildfire smoke, right? So children, the elderly, people who already have breathing problems or heart problems may be more sensitive to wildfire smoke. And then also, just to make it real, we know that communities of color tend to live in more, the more polluted areas tend to be more poor people and people of color. And so if we really want to look at this, that it may be that depending on where you live, black and brown communities might be disproportionately affected by this already, because they already have a load of pollution in this areas they live in. So looking for where do people, work, play, and pray? And does that already put them at greater risk? So just really wanting to mention that, it's really important that we look out for who in our communities are at greater risk, and how do we take care of ourselves, and how do we take care of everyone. And the last thing I just want to mention about health impacts is that, when we think of stress, we probably think of the deadlines we have and our to-do lists, and that feeling we get when that person we don't want to talk to calls us and we see their name on our cell phone, that kind of thing. But it turns out that when we live in urban centers, our bodies are often under stress that we don't even really maybe notice or register as stress. Living in cities, even just the noise of the highway or cars going by, our bodies register that as stress, even if we don't feel anxious, right? So there's a certain amount of stress that we're already living under, for those of us who live in urban centers. And when we're around wildfire smoke, that increases, right? It's just it's hard on our bodies. Our bodies are getting the signal that something's not right. So that's sort of increasing overall stress on our bodies. And then you might actually feel anxiety on top of that too, right? And anxiety because for a lot of different reasons, these particular physical health effects can cause anxiety. But I also want to recognize that there's also, there's an existential piece of this and a spiritual piece of this that, when we're actually dealing with wildfire smoke, and it may bring up a lot of feelings about, what's going on with the planet. And so really wanted to mention that today we're focusing mostly in this workshop on the physical pieces of health impacts of wildfire smoke, but I really want to note that there's, very significant other pieces too. You might be feeling a lot of grief during wildfire season, or you might be feeling, sort of an existential threat, and just want to really name those things and honor them, and say that in some ways in different traditional healing systems, including traditional Chinese medicine, there's an affinity between certain organs and certain emotions. And in traditional Chinese medicine, for example, the lungs are associated with grief. And so there's something sort of beautiful about these set of herbs, I think, for health impacts of wildfire smoke, where if you're working on your lungs and treating your lungs, you're probably also supporting your body with grief. And I just want to name that there could be a lot of collective grief around what's happening with the planet. So that's a little bit about some of the health impacts of wildfire smoke, and that's going to lay out what herbs we're going to talk about, how can we support your bodies and beings with these different systems, so respiratory and immune system and nervous system. So we'll get into some wonderful herbs and how to help support around that. But before we talk about the herbs, we wanted to talk about just other preventative measures, and Carla is going to be doing that.
Great. Thank you so much, Tracey and Becca, for starting us off with that. I hope that you're all enjoying this information and context. I'm feeling deep and connected with it myself. So there are things that we can do always, right? In natural medicine, the first rule is prevention, right? How do you prevent disease and illness in the first place? So some of this might be, common knowledge, but again, I don't like to assume that any common knowledge around health is common knowledge, because we're often misled about what to do sometimes. So first of all, I want to repeat what Tracey mentioned a minute ago. It would be in everyone's best interest to know if you were a part of a particularly sensitive group, people who are predisposed or just more sensitive to disease and illness, but in this case to fine particulate matter, right? So elders, children, anyone who has a pre-existing respiratory or cardiovascular condition, right? I think if you fit that description and you have not already, I would suggest, and we would suggest, that you talk to a health professional or health consultant to see what in particular for your condition would be helpful for you. Second, most obvious thing, avoiding exposure, right? There are, as we know, just with the pandemic, particular populations that unfortunately don't have as much of an option to avoid exposure. If people aren't given time off work and work outdoors, hopefully they have the right protective gear. But if you have the option to avoid being exposed to smoke, to avoid going outside when it's thick, to avoid going outside when it's really hot, when there's smoke, right? We also know the heat will intensify the impact. That's a great thing to do. Staying indoors, but also using some kind of air filtration if you have access to that, or finding some way to at least keep some air flowing. I found in wildfire season last year, some people that weren't able to afford air filters that plug in just kept like a specific set of windows open and had a fan running, so it's not necessarily blowing air from outside all over, but was helping to keep aeration flowing. Wearing properly fitting N95 masks or higher when you're outside. So if you don't already have a source of these, especially if you work in a community context, please contact the Healing Clinic Collective. We have been collecting masks that have been repaired from a county stock where the little elastic band was faulty. And so they were just going to like throw them out. And so a practitioner, and our thousands of them in our network, salvaged them, and a bunch of people repaired them, and they've all been sealed up and all that for a long time. And so, yeah, N95 masks to wear outside. Managing your stress level, you know, me, myself around these times, and, you know, always having whatever works for you. You know, I've got my little gem water here, and my, you know, I'm working with some grief in my family right now. So, you know, having whatever works for you, whatever you do that promotes health, right? I'm not going to say like, go have a fat ice cream sundae followed by another fat ice cream sundae. That's not necessarily going to help your health condition, but if you're managing, you know, physical health conditions as well, but do what you know helps you feel calm and grounded, and stay hydrated. Super basic, but you know, 70 or more % of our bodies are water. 100% of our body requires lots of water to function well, especially under conditions of stress or strain or illness or dis-ease. So staying super hydrated is great. Again, general health, sleeping sufficiently. These two, and Alokin or Chung, who's the other community herbalist, Elokin, sorry, I spoke quickly for the, oh, you know Elokin, Phoebe, so that's great. How to spell their name. Gave an amazing workshop on herbs for sleep, and I learned a lot about just how critical sleep is to your overall health, and especially if you're facing, you know, something that's threatening your health. It's important to do that. Exercising indoors if possible, you know, for obvious reasons. If you're outside and you start breathing really heavily, if you're exerting yourself, you're just going to pull more of those super fine particles into your lungs and deeper down, because we tend to breathe more deeply in, right? Eating nutritious foods. This is you know, another general health tip, but you know, food is medicine, and we're going to learn about herbs tonight, but a lot of these herbs are also used in cooking, and they're all related, you know, so healthy foods that will support your respiratory, but your whole organismo, as they say in Spanish, your entire system of systems is really great. And then, you know, just reducing your exposure to other things, smoking, chemical agents, foods that irritate your respiratory system. I love dairy, and last year I was having a hard time with the smoke, and I needed to really cut down my dairy because it was impacting my lungs, and together with the, you know, with the fire, it was making things worse for me, right? Chemical agents. So yeah, these are some general tips we would share for preventing harm from wildfire smoke. Thanks. And we were gonna offer everyone a quick break before we move into the piece of actually Becca and Tracey will start walking us through herb by herb, how to use them, and exactly what their precise medicine is. So it's 5:39. What do you think? Should we call it 5:40, invite people back at 5:45? Okay, great. So our closed captioner can take a break too. Thank you again, Phoebe, and we'll see you all in 5 minutes. Yes, please be on time because they will start on time.
I'm going to go into the next portion where we actually get to talk about the plants, but just as Becca put in the chat shortly before we took a break, please feel free, if you have other preventative measures that you love, please feel free to drop them in the chat. And when we're talking about the plants, it seemed like there was a lot of great herbal experience in the room. So feel free to ask questions, drop other tips in the chat, and we will have a chunk of time at the end for more Q&A too. Becca, go for it.
Great. All right, welcome back, everybody. So as we talk about the plants, something we also really want to take the time to honor is relationships with plants. You know, when we're thinking about taking care of ourselves and taking care of our communities and taking care of our broader ecosystems, being really mindful about how we interact with plants is a part of that. And it's also a gift. Like, it's one of my favorite things about being an herbalist is developing deep relationships with plants. So some of the plants that we're going to talk about, we kept in mind that they are fairly resilient plants. Many of them are fairly drought tolerant plants. Particular to where we live, again in California, also chose some native plants, though not exclusively. Thinking about plants that are pretty abundant, pretty willing to give, oftentimes easy to grow, because there are all kinds of beautiful plant medicines and herbs out there, and some of them are rare. And we really want to be mindful of respecting the plants and respecting the ecosystems that they come from. So to me, I really try to focus on working with resilient, abundant, drought-tolerant plants. And something else that's really important to keep in mind, again, for myself as a Chinese and European descendant person, is respecting indigenous relationships to plants, which for me means really gardening my plants unless I have explicit permission from an indigenous community to gather herbs from that territory. And there's a few reasons for that. Yeah, again, because if I don't know a place really well, I might not know, you know, what's a healthy stand of plants or not. I might look at a patch of nettles and think that looks great. But what I might not realize if I don't really know that land is that that patch is only, you know, a fourth of the size that it normally is. If I don't know who else in the ecosystem is coming to a certain plant for their food, then I actually am just going to leave it, right? Because I don't necessarily have that really deep knowledge to take in a way that is respectful. So my teachers at Ancestral Apothecary School, and now for myself as a teacher, we really emphasize actually growing your own plants if possible. And I do know that growing is not accessible to everybody. I'm somebody who's lived in apartments for most of the past decade and didn't really have a lot of space to grow. So holding that piece, if it is accessible, to connect with, you know, community gardens, to connect if you're in an urban environment with urban gardens, to connect with people who just grow plants. Again, I know we have folks calling in from all over, and here in the Bay Area, you know, there's a lot growing. There's a lot of rosemary growing. There's things that are abundant. So I really focus on what's abundant, what's already growing here. And then if I have the option to grow my own herbs, to do that. And then we also wanted to list some other sources of herbs, because thinking of accessibility, you know, part of why we're having this class now is so that we can plan ahead a little bit. I mean, we're already in a season where we could start to see wildfires really, you know, impacting us. I know in other parts of, like in Arizona, I know that there's already some wildfires this season. You know, but why we're talking about this now is so we can plan and prepare, maybe get some herbs ahead of time. And also want to say that sometimes we might need to go to a farm or go to an herb supplier or go to the grocery store, because that's also a place where we can find herbs. So I really want to honor all the different ways that, you know, for accessibility reasons, for price, we might go to different sources for herbs, and really want to prioritize, if we can, being in relationship with those plants, growing them, supporting people who grow them, supporting farmers. So this list primarily are farmers. For those of us who live in Northern California, the Sonoma County Herb Exchange is an incredible resource. If you're not already familiar with them, I definitely recommend checking them out. They work with small farmers to grow medicinal herbs, and then you can order from them. Steadfast Herbs is a small farm in Pescadero, California. They are queer owned. They give us free herbs for our work. So, you know, they have a commitment to getting the herbs out there, and you can also support their business and purchase herbs as well. Lunaria Flower Farm is a new farm in Pescadero, California as well. Chinese run and owned. And Gabby is also offering medicinal herbs and flowers as well. A bigger company that you could potentially order from, because, you know, sometimes we might not have those connections to local farmers. And so sometimes we might need to go through a bigger company. One that has a very good selection of herbs is Pacific Botanicals. So yeah, I just want to share that as we talk about the plants, really thinking about honoring the plants, honoring where they come from, being respectful of the plants, growing relationships with them, and thinking about how we source plants is a very, very big part of kind of that sacred relationship we're in with plants and using them as medicine. So we'll go ahead and we'll talk about our first plant. It is mullein. So if there's, you know, anything you walk away from this workshop with, I hope you walk away with a lot of things, but I hope one of them, if you don't already know mullein, is just mullein. You know, get lots and lots of mullein ready for wildfire season. Mullein is a really hardy plant. It grows like a weed. It's the kind of plant that sort of likes to grow in disturbed areas. It'll just pop up and stay for a while. And it is, I'll talk a little bit about some of the benefits. It opens the lungs and bronchial tubes. It is what's called antispasmodic and expectorant, so it's helping us cough things out when we need to. It can help with bronchial congestion, chest colds, allergies, really anything that involves respiratory stress. So that's really why we're kind of prioritizing this plant, is because it's just such a good respiratory herb. And it's very safe, and it's very safe for most people. So the fact that it is safe for most people and just so specific to supporting everything about your respiratory system just makes it a really, really good plant to have during wildfire season. As far as how you would work with it, I would mostly recommend either the tea or the tincture. If you work with the tea, one thing to definitely be aware of is that the leaves of mullein, if you've ever touched it, they're kind of fuzzy, which actually feels very nice. And there are little sticky hairs that if you don't strain the tea really well and you drink it, it can irritate your throat. So especially if the whole point is to not irritate your throat and to soothe your throat, that would really conflict with each other. So what I'd recommend is using 2 tea bags or, you know, using a coffee filter, like multiple filters basically to make a strong mullein tea. And I also want to take the time to mention, like, what is a strong tea? Because there's many different kinds of ways to make what we call tea. And oftentimes, like I grew up just putting a tea bag in some hot water, leaving it for 2 minutes and then drinking that. And that is awesome. That's like flavorful. You are getting some of the medicine of the plant. And you can get a lot more medicine the longer you steep. So as herbalists, we really recommend that folks put loose plants, fresh or dried, into, say, a quart jar, pour hot water over it and let it sit for 8 hours. You know, so that's a huge difference actually between 2 to 3 minutes and 8 hours. Because then the plants really have a long time to have some of those helpful constituents extracted by the hot water. So it's just a really strong tea. So especially in this context where we really want, you know, this medicine to help our respiratory system, I definitely would recommend going for that longer steep, so you really get the benefits of the tea. Another way you could work with this plant is as a tincture. If you're not familiar with a tincture, it's another way to extract a plant. Oftentimes the extraction happens by putting the plant in alcohol or sometimes apple cider vinegar. And you let the plant sit, sometimes for about a month. You strain the plant, and what you're left with is that extract. So that's what we mean by a tincture. So as far as a dosage for a tincture, if you're able to make mullein tincture or buy it, would be, you could have something like 5 to 15 drops 2 to 3 times a day. Some herbalists go lower dosage, some herbalists go higher dosage, and that can have to do with the relationship with the plant as well. So you also might want to just check with yourself too of what feels right, but that's an appropriate dosage. The only caution with mullein is just to be careful to strain really well when drinking tea. Again, because because we want to soothe our throats, we want to not irritate them any further. So I'll go ahead and move to our next plant friend.
Great. Hi, everyone. All right, so the plants that we're starting off with here are a couple ones that are very specific for the lungs. So totally agree with Becca. If you remember nothing else from this time together, just think mullein, mullein, mullein. And that's actually just to say one of the plants that when I'm thinking about working with grief, mullein is one of those ones that I think about too. So I think you're kind of getting just so much there that's really beautiful all together. if you're working with mullein during wildfire season. So our next friend is called plantain, and sadly I don't mean the fruit, because those are delicious, and if those were good for, I mean, I you know, they're delicious. So any kind of medicine I would get from them, I'd be down with. And I get great joy. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about this friend, which you may have seen in sidewalk cracks, in every place where, you know, in the hills. And I was joking when I was looking at the herbs that we chose, because I was like, oh, right, this is the like weeds as medicine workshop, because, you know, there's a perennial discussion between herbalists and other gardeners about what's a medicine and what's weed. And plantain, if you talk to a gardener, probably said, oh, pull that stuff, get that out of there, that's just a weed. But, you know, to us as herbalists, it's a beautiful, wonderful medicine. And just to say that for all the herbs we're talking about tonight, they're like us, right? You know, we're not just good at one thing or known for one thing. Like, we have these complex beings and personalities and ways of being. And all the plants are incredibly wise beings. So it feels funny to just say 2 minutes, like, what's, you know, what does this plant do? So just to honor their fullness and to recognize that for time tonight, we're focusing on specifically what do they do as far as like support during wildfire season. So plantain, it's cooling and moistening. We use the leaves. It's has an affinity for the lungs. It has a really nice affinity for the lungs. It soothes irritation in the lungs themselves, in the bronchial tubes. If you have a sore throat, an irritable dry cough, because it's cooling and moistening, right? When things are irritated, they're sort of hot and like tender, and dry. And so this is really nice for cooling and moistening our throats and for coughing. And if you know you're getting more serious respiratory issues like bronchitis or pneumonia, this is also a beautiful herb, right? Because it's very good. It can moisten when it needs to, but it can also help draw away excess moisture like phlegm when it needs to, right? What a wise being. So it knows which to do. So for example, if it needs to moisten our lungs, it will do that. But if there's, you know, a lot of phlegm that needs to come up or needs to be expectorated, it can help do that. So how amazing is that? Our friend plantain, it's very common, very abundant. So that's wonderful. It's originally from Europe, but is naturalized all over North America and many parts of the world. And just on the dosages, you can see on the slide, tincture 5 to 15 drops 2 to 3 times a day, or 2 to 3 cups of strong tea, just as Becca talked about how to make it. And the last thing I'll say is that, of course, everyone, with all the caveats that Becca said about dosages, if I were to go and buy a big herb company's bottle of tincture, it might say 40 to 60 drops 4 times a day. So you could do that, but often, you know, they're still companies and they're still trying to move product. So oftentimes you can use less. So just in terms of like respecting the plants and the quantities, you know, you can even maybe try first some of these lower dosages and then see what your body needs. And I'll pass it back to Becca.
Great. So this next plant is also one of my favorites for wildfire season. I'm really thinking of like, who do I turn to when the smoke is coming? And marshmallow root is always one that I want to have on hand. And even saying it right now, I'm like, I need to prepare because I don't have a lot in my apothecary right now. I'm curious too, has anybody used marshmallow leaf and root? Feel free to add an emoji or add to the chat, because I'm always curious like who's worked with this beautiful being. So how can we work with marshmallow leaf and root? It soothes inflamed tissue, specifically irritated tissues of the respiratory, digestive system, skin, and bowels. As Tracey mentioned, we're really focusing a lot on impacts of wildfire smoke. And one thing I do just want to shout out is like marshmallow root's really good for constipation. It just really helps like lubricate and moisten any dry or constricted mucous membranes. Marshmallow leaf and root is really great for dry coughs. It soothes and lubricates the lungs. It's what in herbal terminology we call a demulcent, and that word is really talking about like that lubrication, just really moistening, again, mucous membranes. A note of caution, it can decrease blood sugar. So if you are taking any medications that also do that, you'd want to work with supervision to just monitor your blood sugar levels. Otherwise, it's a very safe plant. And as far as, you know, marshmallow root is a fun one too, for me at least, as far as actually physically working with it, because I like to drink it most as an infusion, like a type of tea. And I'll often work with the root. The root tends to be the most popular part of the plant to work with. And with the root, I will put it in a small muslin bag and then put it in cold water and leave it in the fridge overnight. So there's different ways to extract plant medicine. Sometimes you can extract with cold water, sometimes hot water, sometimes both. I like to extract with cold water, and then the next day I squeeze the root and it's all like jelly and mucilaginous. Like it's a very, like you can feel it, you know, it's very mucilaginous. And so then I have that infusion, and I'll dilute that into other water throughout the day and drink it throughout the day. And it really helps. Like if I have a dry throat, like it just helps so much to have something that's so soothing to the throat and to the mucous membranes. There's a few other ways to work with it. Like Tracey and I have talked about this because I love the kind of like mucilaginous feeling, and Tracey's like, I don't like that. So for instance, if it's, you know, okay to share, I know Tracey likes to use the powder. So roots can be powdered. There's different forms of the plant, ways we can prepare them, and powdering something is also a way we can prepare a plant and take in its medicine. So powdering, having marshmallow root powder and just adding that to water and mixing it up is like an immediate way to take that medicine in as well. Something I will say is you can make the medicine hot as well. I was kind of encouraged to do the cold infusion, but you also can get medicine if you do it as a hot tea as well. So if you include it with other herbs, you can still get medicine that way. And then you can also use the leaf as well. It has a little bit less concentration of the medicine, but will also be supportive as well. Tracey, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, that's great. Yeah, the powder, I like the powder just because I'm lazy. So in the morning, with like Becca says, you have to squeeze it out. When you're using the powder, you don't have to do that. You can just drink the whole thing back. So it gets just as mucilaginous. Let the powder sit for a long time too. But then you can just drink the whole thing without having to squeeze it. And it gets just as goopy, but you can just be lazier, honestly. Yeah, and the leaf is a nice tea. It's nice and moistening. It's such a sweet plant. The leaves are so fuzzy. They feel like little pieces of velvet. So if you've never met marshmallow in person, I encourage you to do that. I feel like I want to make a whole bed out of it. But anyway, it's a sweet plant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as far as dosage, you know, you can make that, drink a strong cup of the infusion throughout the day. You can also tincture marshmallow, and again, similar dosage, 5 to 15 drops, 2 to 3 times a day would be appropriate. And it's also funny, we had plantain. Marshmallow there is some connection between like a puffy marshmallow you'd have at a campsite. At some point in time, because of that mucilaginous quality of the plant, people did make candies from marshmallow root, but now, you know, they're very, very separate things, like the little puffy white marshmallow and this plant, they've diverged quite a bit. But if you're wondering, where does that name come from? At one point in time, there was a reason for that. So we'll go ahead and pass to the next plant.
Great. And so since we're trying to get through a bunch of plants tonight, we were also really conscious of trying to choose plants that were, well, since we're in the Bay Area, local to the Bay Area, this won't be local for everyone, but I love bay laurel. If you're in the Bay Area, just going hiking and seeing them, they are, you know, close cousins of tropical trees. And it just feels like that with these broad sweeping, beautiful, beautiful trunks, as you can see in the photo. So if you've ever cooked with bay leaves, or if you've met them fresh, and if you rub them, you know they have these really rich, strong aromatic oils that are a little bit antimicrobial and a little and antifungal also too. And so just a little caution is that they can be really strong, and they can even in some ways cause headaches if you're sensitive to that smell. So it's funny, it can both cause and treat headaches depending on what the time is and who you are. But we wanted to mention bay in specific for another kind of way that you can access medicine. And many of you have probably done this. This is a classic folk remedy from really so many parts of the world, is to do an herbal steam. And so if you've never done one before, I just love doing them just in general because they're so lovely and relaxing. But you can see from the photo this idea of what they look like is you boil water and you put it in a bowl. And you can even just use water at that point. You don't have to use anything else. But if you want to add herbs, that can really spruce it up a little bit, so to speak. And so like you can crush in fresh or dried bay leaves, eucalyptus, rosemary, lavender, you know, whatever you like. Lavender can be really relaxing, especially if you're feeling like a little anxious during wildfire season. And then you can create a tent with a towel over your head and breathe in deeply. Long, slow inhales and exhales through your nose and mouth, right? So we wanted to mention this because, like we said at the beginning, right? Wildfire, breathing smoke all the time is very, very drying for your system. So this helps to actually get moisture directly to the places that are feeling dry, in your sinuses, in your mouth, in your throat, in your chest. So that's why it's a beautiful way of like, you know, treating yourself during wildfire season. If you don't have access to fresh herbs, you could use essential oils. Bit of caution there. Essential oils are incredibly concentrated, which means a couple things. One, that it actually uses up a huge amount of plant matter to create an essential oil. So just for the sustainability of our plant friends, really being, you know, judicious and being careful about using essential oils and maybe cutting it back, because we don't want to overuse plants. And also on the actual moment of doing a steam, more is not better. If you're an activist and have been out in the streets, it's very easy to feel like you've made yourself a little tear gas area. You don't want to do that. So literally like 1 to 2 drops. 3 is really on the edge of too much. So just think of like adding 1 or 2 drops. And if it gets too strong, you can lift up the tent. But that's our friend Bay. And so you can think of it in herbal steams, and you can think about using other plants for that too. And I will pass it back to you, Becca.
Great. So another herbal friend who I love so much is thyme. It's a very culinary herb, originally native to Europe and now naturalized in many places of the world as well. And during wildfire season, as Tracey really shared with us about the health impacts, like our immune system can oftentimes become really decreased. And I know for myself, I'm somebody who gets colds and flus a lot. So I really have to be mindful of my susceptibility to basically, catching colds and flus and other things that my immune system would help me work with. So thyme is absolutely one of my favorite plants, and such an effective plant. It's really antiviral. It's helpful for treating coughs and chest complaints. It strengthens the thymus gland, which enhances immune function. Thyme is a powerful, effective disinfectant and can be used as a wash as well. And just really helpful to fight off infections inside your body. If, also externally too, you can use it to clean wounds, which is a little bit of an aside from wildfire season, but hopefully. As far as its safety, I would recommend using with caution or supervision if pregnant. It is overall a very safe herb. And as far as how to work with it, there's many ways to work with it. I really love working with it as tea. And again, thinking very practically of my home apothecary, the herbs I'm thinking about for wildfire season, I really like to make a tea with thyme in it. So honestly, my wildfire season tea is typically mullein, thyme, and tulsi. And if I have other things, I'll add them, but we'll talk about tulsi in a moment. Those to me are kind of some powerful friends and herbs that are really going to help my body and what I need to pay attention to during wildfire season. It's got a savory taste. If you cooked with thyme, it has its distinct taste. I like how that tastes in tea. If you're not as much into a savory tea, you might want to add some different notes, like to the tea blend I just mentioned. You could add some peppermint or some rose or some lemon balm. Those are going to add kind of different qualities to the flavor. But I really like having thyme on hand to add to my teas to help me prevent getting sick when I'm in a situation where I'm really stressed and my body is really stressed. So I absolutely think of supporting my immune system when I think of wildfire season, because when my body is stressed, like I get sick very easily. So that's something I really want to pay attention to. For dosage, again, that tea would be a great option, making a really strong tea, and a tincture dosage, 5 to 15 drops, 2 to 3 times a day as well. All right.
Great. So next one, Becca just mentioned this lovely, lovely ally, Tulsi, or holy basil, as you may have heard it called. And like our friends that we talked about, bay and thyme, which are very aromatic and have these lovely like oils that are just like kind of opening, all of that has a nice affinity for your respiratory system, right? And so Tulsi is, in sort of the Western herbalism sense, we call it an adaptogen. And what that fancy word means is that it can help support a balanced stress response across your entire body. So it's not an herb that is like especially good just for your respiratory system or just for your nervous system, but it helps your body overall adapt to stress and to relieve stress. So what an amazing ally to have in the mix. So that's why we included it today, is just this idea of like our bodies are under stress during wildfire season, whether or not we perceive that to be true, it's happening. And so Tulsi has been used for thousands of years. It's a very spiritual plant in the Hindu tradition to the deities Vishnu and Lakshmi, and in Ayurveda, it's been used for thousands of years. And so in that tradition, that, sort of, instead of calling it an adaptogen, it's called a rasayana, which means that it can help restore vitality and bring long life. So across many different traditions, it's recognized as an amazingly strong plant. And in addition to helping with stress overall, it has a nice affinity for the respiratory system too. Yes, exactly. Thank you, Durga. Yeah. the plant embodiment of the goddess Lakshmi. So it can be an expectorant, so helping with coughs or excessive mucus and bronchitis. So like we said before, if you have a sore throat and maybe phlegm that is or isn't coming up, especially when we get really dry, maybe we're coughing but nothing's coming up, Tulsi can help with that, can help bring up what needs to come out. And taken over the longer term, it can be really nice to help with asthma symptoms. And so adaptogens are herbs that, if you want to feel stress relief in the exact moment, like right this second, it won't help as much, right? These are ones that you want to take over a long time to feel like, weeks or months to feel the effects of stress relief. So over the long term, if you take Tulsi, one of the effects can be reducing asthma symptoms. It's abundant, it's easy to grow. Something to avoid though, if you're pregnant or trying to get pregnant. And just as a note that it is a diuretic. So if you're trying to stay hydrated, maybe don't go for 5 cups of Tulsi a day, just like something to keep in mind. And the dose you can see here, 5 to 20 drops of tincture 2 to 3 times a day, or again, these 2 to 3 cups of strong infusion. And keeping on the theme of the nervous system support, I'll pass it back to Becca.
Great. So California poppy is, again, at least for me here in California, a native plant, a very resilient, abundant plant. Spring is really its time to shine. So I've noticed that the poppy populations are already kind of dwindling. It's hot, but they do really well. They grow a lot of different places. Again, very drought tolerant, very resilient, very abundant plants. So California poppy, we included, Tracey just mentioned that Tulsi you could take over time to help with stress. And California poppy is one of the kinds of herbs that you can take in the moment if you're feeling really stressed to get some immediate support. I tend to work with California poppy in its tincture form because its taste is really quite intense, a little too bitter and intense for me. You could absolutely try working with it as tea, just prepare yourself for that, taste explosion. And so I work with it mostly as a tincture. It is sedative, antispasmodic, can help in sleeping longer. It can help calm your energy when you're overstimulated and hyperactive. It helps relax your mind and body and also promote some level of integration between mind and body. And it relieves tension, including from pain. Something that I think is really beautiful about the plants is that they have a lot of similarities and then some specificities. And then there's also matching that with how they individually interact with our bodies. I mentioned that because with California poppy, there's a lot of different herbs that can help with stress. And a few I'll mention are skullcap, passion flower, lavender that Tracey mentioned, lemon balm, chamomile. And you may love those plants, and that's great. So you should work with them, you know. So the idea is not necessarily only work with these, but these are, you know, insights into the beautiful plant world and to the different relationships we have. What I really like about California poppy, going specifically to it, is that it is pretty sedative. So if you're finding that you are very anxious and want to calm down, that sedating feeling is definitely one of California poppy's strong suits. And also, something that I really think about for wildfire season is quite disturbed sleep. You know, because as we've been talking about, it's like, I know for me, it is a time I'm very anxious. I'm very upset. I'm worried. It's an existential anguish. And it's also worry about my friends who might be closer to the fires than I am. And we haven't even talked about that if you're on the front line of a fire, like it's kind of a whole different situation. I mean, it's complete stress response, complete trauma response if you're fleeing a fire, which some of us may have had that experience or know loved ones who have gone through that experience. So this kind of herb can help with anything of that, you know, of that variety of just any type of stress or trauma. It can help us come down a little bit to feel sedated. And specifically for sleep, you could take the tincture in a higher dosage about an hour before going to sleep to help fall and stay asleep. So if you struggle with sleep during wildfire season or at any other time, an herb like California poppy can be really helpful because it is so sedating. So a potential dosage for sleep would be 20 to 30 drops an hour before sleep. And some people need a little bit more, so you could experiment with that.
Great. All right, so we're moving towards the last plant that we're going to go through in depth tonight. And it was a challenge to get us down to 8 plants, especially when herbalists love so many. But this last one that we're going to talk about is dandelion root, which many of you probably know, and continuing the theme of weeds as medicine. I mean, I know when I was a kid, I was told to go out and pick the dandelion from the lawn because it was a weed. And now I'm like, wait a minute, it's medicine. But one of the reasons we included it here is that it's very supportive for your liver. And so when I said at the beginning that most of the health impacts from wildfire smoke are because the particles of the ash, the PM 2.5, the particulate matter 2.5, are really, really small and they irritate our systems, that's most of the health impacts. But there are some other elements to wildfire smoke, like carbon monoxide and I think nitrous oxides that can actually be not good for breathing in either. They're a little bit toxic. So that's why we definitely wanted to include a liver herb. Also, whenever one part of our system gets taxed, the other parts of our body have to like work harder to make everything go. So when our bodies are stressed by things coming at us, it's really nice here, especially since some of those are toxins, to support the liver. So it's beautiful. Talking specifically about the root, it can be taken over the long term as a general tonic, or even for more serious liver conditions. So you can take it, you know, for a few days at a time. You can take it for a few months at a time. It's really quite safe. It's also good for digestion. So it's a little bit bitter, it stimulates bile, and it increases your poop. So don't be alarmed if that happens when you take it. That is the dandelion doing what it's best at. Some people have latex allergies, so for people with latex allergies, you might want to be careful with dandelion root. But yeah, it's a lovely, safe but strong liver support. And so tincture doses, maybe like 5 to 15 drops, 2 to 3 times a day, or 2 to 3 cups of tea a day. And this is where, for dandelion, since it's not a leaf, but it's a root, we actually, when we make tea with it, we want to cook it a little bit for like longer. So to actually, instead of just pouring hot water over it, if you're using the dried root, you want to probably bring it to a boil and let it simmer for at least 20 minutes. 20 minutes is good. If you have a crock pot and can put it in a crock pot overnight for 8 hours, even better. That'll make really, really beautiful, strong medicine. So that's kind of the tour here, maybe just to say that we've chosen these 8 herbs because they're quite safe and quite abundant generally for folks. And like I said, it was tough to narrow it down, but just to remind you of the tour that we've been on, we said a couple herbs, mullein and plantain, that were really beautiful and direct lung support. Then we talked about a couple of herbs or ways of taking herbs that are really good for moistening when we dry out in wildfire season. So your marshmallow and your steams with plants like bay leaves, which have a beautiful affinity for the respiratory system. But yeah, so your moistening strategies, supporting your immune system with thyme, supporting your nervous system for stress with Tulsi and California poppy, and then our friend dandelion, supporting your liver. So those are like a few, like the menu of options of some core things that you might want to do during wildfire season to support your body. And with that, I think we were going to see if anyone has any questions or wants to share anything about their own strategies for during wildfire season. So feel free to put something in the chat or come off mute, whatever works for you.
There were a couple of questions in the chat earlier, Tracy. I wonder if they were all.
Yeah, I'm seeing one right now. Maybe you want to chat about this, Becca, since you were describing your beautiful lung season tea, but can you talk more about mixing the herbs, blends of tinctures or teas?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I think in a lot of ways, mixing herbs can be very intuitive and fun and playful. And, you know, formulating when we have really specific medical conditions, or we just want a lot of specificity. That's kind of part of the art of herbalism, is learning the plants and bodies over time. I think for the herbs that we just talked about, if you're to think about formulating for wildfire season, would be, am I including an herb that supports my lungs? Am I including an herb that supports my stress? And then for me, I actually forgot to add that I typically do have dandelion root in my tea formula for a wildfire smoke, because I am pretty concerned about what's in the air. So wanting to support my liver and being able to process different things like pollutants in the air. So I think thematically, like that's why I suggested the tea blend that I did, is because, you know, lungs, stress, liver support. Then depending on if there's something, and immunity, because again, I tend to get sick pretty easily. And then if there's something specific to you, like if you have a really dry throat, making sure that you have something that's going to really moisten it. I think there's also some other fun ways to think about formulating, including like, are these herbs I have a special connection to? Are they herbs that I have a cultural or ancestral relevance and connection to? Are they herbs I can access and have? You know, are they affordable to me? Those are all things. And then definitely taste, like especially for tea. So part of why I did mention the blend that I mentioned is because Tulsi is a really yummy tea. So like if I can include Tulsi in the tea, then I'm happy, because it's just going to taste really nice. Some other tastes I love would be lemon balm. I love rose, chamomile as well. Chamomile has, you know, if you've never had a really strong steep of chamomile, it actually gets quite bitter. Chamomile can be a very bitter herb. So I'm careful when I do that long steep with chamomile, but I do love chamomile as well. So I think of flavor, I think of what I'm trying to do, and I think of my special connection to the plants. That's what I think of with formulating. And I guess the last thing I'll say too is, you know, when you steep for a long time, you're getting significant medicine, because what you also want to consider is amounts, right? So, you know, if you only have a teeny leaf of Tulsi and the rest is thyme, then, you know, you're really getting the benefits of thyme more than Tulsi. So if you want kind of all of the benefits, you might equally spread out the proportions, which is what I tend to do. So I'll have a tea blend that's about a fourth thyme, a fourth Tulsi, which is strong. I saw Tracy make a face. A fourth thyme, a fourth Tulsi, a fourth dandelion root, a fourth mullein, because I care so deeply about all four of those different categories.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Becca. We have some more great questions in the chat, so maybe I'll just do a couple and then pass it back to you. Yeah, so recommendations or advice when using herbs for children and the elderly. Oh, I just want to say one last thing, just building on what Becca said about combining herbs into formulas. Even if the dose is like 15 drops 3 times a day of an herb, and if you're taking all 3, that doesn't mean necessarily that you need 45 drops. You know, If you were to take all and put them in the same bottle, you could probably reduce it a little bit to have it be maybe 20 drops of that combined, because they do have these beautiful effects when they work together. But see what's best for you. Juan, thanks for your question about herbs for children and the elderly. And basically all of the herbs that we picked here are pretty safe for everyone. So what you might want to do for children and seniors is just to reduce the dosages. Yeah, so again, you know, all else being equal and no other particular health things, tinctures and teas are both fine, and just reduce the dosages. Yeah. And then maybe I'll answer Alex's question too real quick is, infusions every day, or do you make them in bulk and store? Personally, I sometimes, depending on how busy I am, if you can make them every day, great. And especially for those long infusions, making them right before you go to bed, so they have the, you know, while you're sleeping to infuse, and then you wake up to the beautiful tea, that's awesome. But there's definitely times when I'll make a couple days worth, two or 3 days worth, and then infuse them, strain them, and then put them in the fridge. And then when I take them out, I'll, if I'm going to warm them up, which I often do, just be careful not to boil them too much. You can bring them up to a nice warm temperature, but not to boil them. And I'm wondering if you want to take the next couple, Becca, about tincture and hot versus cold liquid.
Sure. And I was just putting some resources in the chat. Feel free to add your website too, Tracey. So a question I see here is there a recommendation for taking tinctures in cold versus hot liquid? So the way that I work with tinctures is I do them directly on my tongue. It can be strong if it's an alcohol-based tincture. So you can put in cold or hot water, and either would be fine. If you are averse to the alcohol taste of a tincture, putting a few drops into hot water is actually a really good option because the alcohol evaporates, but the plant medicine stays. So if you don't like that taste, hot water is probably your best bet. And then it looks like we answered the question about California poppy. We can use the whole plant. Any other questions? Did we miss any? I think we got them. Great. Well, I think, you know, we're approaching the end of our time together. So I guess I just really want to say thank you. Thank you for making this time. I know many of you have plant knowledge, so thank you for bringing what you already know. And thank you for supporting the Run for Salmon. I am truly just so happy to be able to share this beautiful heart donation with them. And you're very welcome to make more donations or support in other ways. You can stay in touch with us, stay in touch with Tracey, stay in touch with myself. We just shared our links, and you can also support our herbal project, and you can do that by going to healingcliniccollective.net, and Carla just shared a link there. So if you want to help us get more medicine out to people, you can even make a donation directly to our project as well. Any other announcements, Carla, from Healing Clinic Collective? Or
Hi. Thank you. I just put our website information in the chat, and I just want to thank you so much, Becca and Tracey, for this beautiful, beautiful offering. And I put there that you can support CHIRP, you know, one of, besides serving our local community here in the Bay Area, our other dedication is supporting First Nations that are protecting their language and way of life and sacred places and the elements that we all need. So you can support CHIRP via the HCC that way. If you go to our homepage, I also want to let folks know that we are organizing for a healing clinic this fall. It's an offering for the trans, GNC, and Two-Spirit community specifically. So you can go to our homepage and find information there specifically about that. If you have family you would like to refer to that, or if you identify that way and would like to sign up as a volunteer or a practitioner. So thank you so very much again. And I think there's all the information to continue supporting the Run for Salmon as well. So Glaso, very grateful to everyone. Good evening.
awesome. Have a good evening, everybody.
Have a lovely evening. Thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate your great questions.